You can't fully understand Israeli history without knowing about Golda Meir, Israel's to date only female prime minister. Shalom, friends. This is the Kiva Gersh with Israel in 5, where we give you everything Israel in 5 minutes. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions or want to keep the conversation going, please do so below in the comments. Golda Meir. She became an icon, a person that everybody knows in Israeli society. And her story is an amazing one. I want to share a few of the highlights of her life with you so you can get to understand and know this woman a little bit better. She was born in Kiev in 1898, and when she was 8 years old, her family moved to the United States. She lived in Milwaukee, and that's why her English was so good. She was Israeli, she was Russian, but when she spoke English, she sounded like an American. And that came to her aid very much so later on in her political career. As a young kid, she was already such a doer, someone who wanted to help out in so many different ways. When she was a kid at her elementary school, there were certain children in her class who couldn't afford the textbooks. Back then, they had to buy your own books. They didn't just come automatically at the beginning of the school year. And there was a few kids in her class who couldn't afford the books. Therefore, they couldn't do their schoolwork properly. She felt that that's not okay, and she did a whole fundraiser as a little kid for these other children in her class so that everybody had the books that they needed in order that there could be equality in their educational system. An amazing thing. She later on got inspired by Zionism in her teenage years and committed to moving to the Holy Land, to the land of Israel, which she did shortly after she got married at the young age of 19. In 1921, she moved with her new husband. Shortly a few years after they got married, they were going to move earlier, but then World War One kind of disrupted that plan. In 1921, they finally moved to the land of Israel, and they lived and worked on a kibbutz, right? The Zionist dream, the Zionist way, working very hard and putting our hands in the soil of the land of Israel to really transform it and to bring it back to life after 2,000 years of Jewish living not really happening outside a few urban centers. After a few years of that, she really got involved with the politics and the Zionist movement and infrastructure. And she was called upon to really start taking a more leading role in that. Therefore, her husband and her, they left the kibbutz, they moved to Tel Aviv, they lived in Jerusalem as well, and she got involved in politics, which basically is what she did the rest of her life. In 1948, when the new state of Israel was formed and the War of Independence had broken out, and Israel was literally fighting for its life before the state of Israel was actually founded, it was illegal for Israel to bring in weapons and bullets and all these things because the British were still in charge under the terms of the Mandate of Palestine given to them by the League of Nations after World War One. And then afterwards, they just needed a lot of money to buy supplies, buy the military supplies that they needed. And so David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, sent Golda Meir, because of her English, to America to speak in Jewish communities around America. They said that she came to America with one little bag and $10 in her hand, basically. And she toured around the country and spoke off the cuff, no prepared speeches, just from the heart to all these thousands and thousands of Jews in these different Jewish communities. And she basically said to them, look, whether or not we fight this war is not up to you. We're going to fight this war. We are fighting this war. We have to fight this war. Whether we win it or not could be up to you. And she came back to Israel, the newly born state of Israel, with $50 million raised by Jews around America. And that was back then. This money helped tremendously. And David Ben-Gurion himself said that when the history of this war is written, they will say that it's because of one woman's efforts that we won the war. And of course, that woman was Golda Meir. Shortly after that, she became the ambassador to Russia because of her Russian roots and her knowledge of the Russian language. And when she first got there, she went to Shabbat she went to synagogue the first Shabbat that she was there, and there was like barely any Jews. She was so dumbfounded. How could it be? It was under communism. It wasn't so easy to be a Jew in public, and most Jews hid their Judaism completely. A few months later, she went to synagogue again for the high holidays, and the place was packed, and the streets all around the synagogue were flooded with Jews. Why? Because they heard somebody from the newly born state of Israel was coming to synagogue, and they wanted to see her. And they got over their fears, and they came out anyway, and they showed in public, probably for the first time in their lives, that they were Jewish. They were so inspired by this Israeli coming to be with them. And she got up at some point, she stood on something and she said to this huge crowd of Jews in Russia, thank you so much for remaining Jews, despite all these, very harsh conditions that you've been in. And they screamed back at her, thank you to the state of Israel for helping us to remain Jews. So an incredible and emotional moment. Fast forward in 1969, she actually became prime minister. That's when she became the first female prime minister Israel ever had. And since then, still is the only female prime minister Israel has ever had. The prime minister at the time, Levi Eshkol, had suddenly died and she took over. And she was in office for 4 years until 1973. She was a unique prime minister. She called the soldiers her boys. She was like a grandmother to everyone. She really was like the nation's grandmother. They say about her, even after she would have meetings all night long and was exhausted, tired, she would clean up her kitchen before going to sleep so that the maid who came in the morning didn't have to do too much work. Then 1973 came and the Yom Kippur War, and Israel was caught off guard. As a result of that, she actually resigned because of the mistakes that were made, both politically and militarily. But I'll just end with this one little story. During this the Yom Kippur War, she went up to the Golan Heights to visit what was happening on the front lines, and she visited an army base, and she was talking to these soldiers who had come from all over the country, left their jobs, left their families to fight this war, and she was asking about their peace and how they're doing and what they're seeing and what they're experiencing. And then after she finished hearing from them, she asked them, like, do you have any questions for me? And none of the soldiers asked anything because they were like, how do you ask the prime minister a question? But there was this one younger soldier who did ask a question. He said, yeah, I have a question. And he said like this: in 1948, I had a family member die, and they said that was going to be the last war Israel had to fight, and it was all worth it. But then in 1956, we had another war against Egypt, and I had an uncle who died, and they said the same thing. That's going to be the last war, and it was all worth it. But then in 1967, he said, this soldier, my father died in the 6-Day War. And they said the same thing, that this is going to be the last war, but here we are again at war. What do you mean? How does this all make sense? How is this all worth it? And she shared with this soldier and the other soldiers present that story of when she went to Russia in 1948 and what she heard from all the Jews there, that the existence of the state of Israel, even the thought of the existence in the years before and leading up to the existence of the state, gave those Jews so much hope and so much pride. And she said to the soldier and the other soldiers present, look, if it was only for us here in this land, I'd maybe agree with you and say it's not worth it. But if it's for all world Jewry and what we're doing here has a positive impact on Jews around the world, it's absolutely worth it. And she said, of course, what we are doing here is not only for us Jews living in Israel, but just for Jews living all around the world. This was Golda Meir, my friend, one of the most amazing and important figures and leaders in Israeli history. Now you know a little bit more about her.